Hello,
Hey,
Will.
Mark. How we doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. Not too bad at all.
Good stuff. You're recording all the preamble as well?
Oh, of course, absolutely. Not that anyone's here to hear me speak, of course, but yeah, we'll just record it from the start just to save any technical glitches or whatever. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, the intro won't take long. A very quick bit about the group, and then obviously introduce the star of the show, essentially, which is yourself.
I don't have any sharing options. I don't know. I need to make me a co-host or something to be able to do that.
Let me see. Make co-host. Yep. Cool. That should come up your side.
Yeah, cool. Got sharing options now.
Got that. Cool. Yeah. I'll actually share my screen just now. There we go. Can you see that? Yeah.
I can.
Perfect. Mr. Nicholson's very quiet there. It's not like him.
He's not saying much, is he?
No.
I reckon he's probably just joined and then done off somewhere. And he's got cameras off.
Child duty potentially at this time of night.
Yeah,
kids need fed. How's things anyway? You busy at the moment? Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Transitioning from one project to another at the moment, so it's just trying to wrap some stuff up on one while actually trying to plan for the other. So it's there's a lot going on, and then people asking you to talk at events and stuff as well.
Well, this is it exactly. But, when you're high profile, Mark, what can you say?
I don't know why people want to listen to my ramblings.
I think I saw Northeast in E-Tech's back up and running as well. Is it?
Yeah, we've been back for a few months now.
Have you? Right.
I think we're actually starting to investigate hybrid events as well now. I think people are desperate to get back in the system.
Yeah.
Some people are, some people aren't. So hybrid events are the way to go.
No, exactly. Yeah. But it'd be nice to kind of meet face to face as well and have a beer and just kind of socialise a bit.
It's next Thursday if you want to give it a plug, Martin.
Was it? Right. Well, listen, you honestly feel free to mention it. No worries at all. So yeah, no, definitely do that.
So I'm just waving people leaving the office going to the pub. I will be following them soon.
Indeed. What's the weather like in Newcastle? Obviously, I'm up in Edinburgh just now.
Oh, it's like end of days weather, like horizontal rain. All the buses and metros are stranded and stuff.
It's the same up here. It's just it's quite depressing actually. Summer is definitely gone now.
Yeah, I've driven in the car today because there was no way I was standing at the bus stop today. Like that horizontal rain. In fact, I think at one point it was actually going up the windows outside of the building. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a time of year. Should be Christmas. Did I say it?
Oh, don't say that.
Well, listen, it's there'll be nothing on the shelves either, apparently. So we've been told. So it might be time to start stocking up.
Brilliant. Okay, get that panic buying going. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, jeez, I know. Like we've not had enough of that.
It's ridiculous, the whole fuel thing.
Oh yeah, crazy, absolutely crazy.
Joined the world of electric though, Martin. I bet you never thought I'd do that.
Have you?
I am. Yeah. So I've got a hybrid now, which is like as far as I'm getting towards electric.
Very conscientious.
I might consider hydrogen at some point, but.
Is that something you're going to build yourself, though, Mark? That's a question.
No. When it comes to building, I've still got my massively petrol car. That's no plan changing that one. It's going back together. That one at the moment. The engine and the car are two separate.
Recording in.
getting a few modifications as we speak.
Oh, is it? Right.
Yeah.
So you've got that as well as a side project. So
yeah, that keeps me busy. That's just to get me out of the house, to be fair, just finish off the garage. Like away to your
Yeah.
shed, Danielle kicks me out.
oh, quite right. Get a bit of me time. And,
Yeah, it's quite nice. It's a bit of my man cave. I've got my beer fridge in there, and I've got my car and all my tools.
Oh, that could be a lot worse then. Could be a lot worse. A break for the missus there. Yeah.
It's a shame I'm in the office today, actually, Martin, because if I wasn't, that's where I work as well. I've set my office up in the corner there, so
Oh, do you?
it means I can get up and tinker with the car every now and then as well. It's quite nice.
Perfect. Just admitting a few people.
Evening, gents.
Hey, evening, Johnny. How are we doing?
Not too bad, but my camera keeps turning off. I've no idea why.
I've had to bring my own camera today. One thing we don't have on our bookable desks now is cameras. So the camera we're stuck with is the laptop camera. And because the laptop's on the desk, it kind of spends its whole life looking up your nose. So it's never a good camera angle. So
No, well, there isn't a good camera angle for me. So
yeah,
I think the best camera angle for me is off. This one's really washed out as well for some reason.
It looks all right. It looks all right. It's got quite a lot of light on your face from one side.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
Are you on floor 6, Mark?
I am. I am actually sitting in your old desk, Mark.
I thought that was my old desk.
Because you can see the electricity cabinet sticking on the back.
Yes, yeah. It was a giveaway. I thought it looked familiar.
I sat at John's old desk, but his mouse is a biohazard, so I'm not going to move.
Give it a couple of minutes and then we'll get started. There's a few still to join.
It's quieter on this floor. Be a bunch of rowdy grads in the background if it was on the second floor.
Yeah.
Don't worry, you can soon beat that out of them.
Probably all gone to the pub now. I mean, finding the grad in the office at 5:30 is quite a hard thing to do. We were talking about you before, Matt. Were you on baby duty?
Baby duty. Earlier on this afternoon?
No, just before when you were on the call. We're chatting away to you.
Just saying you're unusually quiet, Matt.
Oh, right. No, it's just, well, there's all sorts going on in the house at this time of night. The oldest has just got back in, so yeah, there's noise downstairs. So I have to keep on muting myself. Screams. Oh God! Just wait till number 3 comes next month.
Johnny's camera's playing up again.
Yep, yep. It just keeps turning off. So unplug it, plug it back in. It's on for a while.
It's got some sort of sleep mode or something.
Oh,
you didn't move more, Johnny. It's like the lights in the office. Yeah, if I don't move very long, it'll go dark. You just need to keep jumping about and stuff.
Yes. Yep. It's very odd. I'm gonna have to go and do some USB digging and see what's going on. But not now.
Cool. Shall we get started then? There's a few still to join, but I think we can kind of kick off proceedings if everyone's in agreement.
I'm all good.
Yep. Okay, cool. I'll just admit people as they come then. So yes, obviously welcome to today's We Are Tech event. Obviously good to see you all here on what is probably the first proper wintry Tuesday night that we've had this year so far. So thanks for joining us. Obviously we're delighted to have Mark Joes here, who is Chief Engineer at Scott Logic. But before we kind of get to the main event, just a few words from myself, around the group and the agenda for today, essentially. So for anyone that's new to the group, that's not been at one of our meetups yet, obviously we are Tech Meetup, and what we're keen to do is really cover a broad range of topics to really include all, regardless of your kind of tech interest necessarily, or indeed your kind of level of expertise. We're based out of the Northeast, but open to everyone regardless of location. Obviously, we are online at the moment, which is great. We will potentially look at doing a hybrid event at some point. It'd be good to actually meet some people in person, especially after the last 18 months. So do look out for that. Again, would love to have your input. So if you have something you're particularly interested in, would like to suggest a topic, please feel free to do so. Or if you'd like to speak, do get in touch with myself. I'll give you the details at the end. And of course, we'll do our best to facilitate. So this event will be recorded. It's been recorded already. So if you don't want to be on the video, do turn your camera off. And a quick thanks to Sageza, who are sponsoring tonight's meetup. So very simple agenda for the evening. Obviously, I'll shortly hand over to Mark, who'll be talking for 30-40 minutes. Then we'll have a short Q&A afterwards, around about 15 minutes. Mark, you'd said as well, if people had want to bring anything up during the talk, they can actually pop it in the comments, and you'll maybe address that at the time as well. Yeah. So
either in the comments or butt in. It's fine.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be interrupted.
Cool. Perfect.
I like that a bit more interactive rather than just chatting, talking at people for.
Indeed. So a bit of an open forum this evening, which is always nice. Once we're finished with that, I'll give you a quick overview. We've got a couple of events coming up as well. And that will be us for the evening. So I will hand over to yourself, Mark. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much. And now I will share mine and hopefully share the right screen, because I have shared the wrong ones in the past. Cool. Should be able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Be a title slide.
Perfect.
Cool. Great. Hi, I'm Mark. Interesting talk tonight. For me, documentation is not something I normally talk about. I'm a very hands-on codey person. But I was speaking to an ex-colleague from a project I worked on a few years ago who is working on a product that kind of, I guess, inspired this talk a little bit and made me kind of consider documentation. Really quick bit about me. I noticed there's a few familiar names on the call, so there's a few people on the call who know me already. But my name's Mark. I'm the Chief Engineer at Scott Logic. You can contact me pretty much on social media. Is the easiest way to get a hold of me. Details on the slide there. Obviously, it's being recorded, so you can view it back. You can reach out after this if you want to speak about things. Quite happy to talk. Want to start a little bit talking about my history. So I guess before I got into software, my degree's in physics. I was a physicist. I worked at the National Physics Laboratories in London. And I spent a lot of my time working on the theory of things. So writing lots of documents, writing lots of things down, the odd bit of practical. I'd do the odd proof of concept, which was called an experiment back then. And spent a lot of time writing how things worked. And that was interesting to me, but it doesn't really mirror my development life. So I got into software. I kind of fell into software. I was the only person who kind of done software as a hobby when I was working at NPL. And we had a control system and we needed some software for the control system. And it was like, Mark, can you have a look at this? And I kind of fell into software that way a little bit. But I guess my software life was different to my physics life, in that I hated writing documentation. And normally when asked to build something, I was pretty much hack it and scarper, to be fair. I'd jump straight in, start writing code and just hack about till it kind of worked. Documentation was always like an afterthought, and I always viewed it as a bit of a chore. I was more interested, I was quite young at the time, more interested in just writing code and seeing things work. My dad, I'll talk a little bit about my dad, was a domestic appliance engineer. And actually, he obviously had an engineer in his job title. We used to bounce off each other all of the time, and he was always say, "Oh yeah, you scientists, you deal with the theory, and us engineers actually make it work." And it's a shame you're recording this. I hope he never sees it, but I'm going to agree with him a little bit. I always used to obviously have a bit of banter, I hate the word banter, but a bit of banter with him about it. But I'm actually going to agree with him a little bit. And I guess this ties a lot into software engineering, old school software engineering, where there'd be loads and loads of designs and upfront thinking, very, very waterfally, and reams and reams of analysis by business analysts and lots of other things. And then it would be handed over to the software engineers, software developers, and then you'd have to make it work. And that rang true. It made me think about my dad joking on back then. So I guess a few things that I remember from a long time ago, in a fading memory. Basically, we used to spend months and months gathering requirements, and then we used to spend a lot of time designing, drawing pictures, and then we used to spend lots of time in meetings and workshops, and that we produce these massive requirements documents, and they were always very wordy. I remember writing a few documents like where I'd been asked to write a spec, and the spec was literally, I could have wrote the spec as a list of 10 bullet points, but because the requirement was to produce a requirements document, I'd actually find myself like padding this document out to make like these bigger readable paragraphs, just so it looked like I'd actually done some work. Again, I was quite junior back then. So I started thinking about this, and I started thinking about, I guess, some of the stuff I'm doing now around not being waterfall in more agile environments. And I started doing a little bit of research around like document-driven development. There's probably a question to be asked at the end of this. I'm not going to talk about it, but people might say that document-driven development is kind of behavior-driven development or business-driven development, BDD. I'm happy to have that discussion at the end of this, but I feel like it's something a bit different. But I really wanted to understand that. So I did some research. If you type document-driven development into Google and start picking up some of the blog posts that come to the top, there's not really much consensus on what it is. I think a lot of people talk about a lot of different things. Some people talk about what I would consider a very, very waterfall approach. Some people talk about the process involved, and some people talk about what I would say is probably lighter than what I'd like to talk about tonight. What does exist out there and what's documented out there, the majority of it feels very, very heavy and old-fashioned. It feels like reams and reams of documentation, written, wordy documentation around a bunch of requirements. I also stumbled across some suggested workflows, which made a little bit of sense to me. Basically, write or update the document, write a failing test according to that document, write the code to pass the failing test, and then I guess refactor if needs be. And I think that seems fair. That to me, though, feels a little bit like if the document was some behavioral requirement, that feels a little bit like BDD. And it does feel like documentation is an all-encompassing word for lots of things, like what is a document, and I'll come on that in a bit. I guess one other person's view, which I'd also like to share, and I'm going to read through this because this made me laugh. So basically, what aspects of an application need to be documented, and their view on this was all aspects. And then I abbreviated the list for your pleasure, because actually they had requirements, motivation, application purpose, resources involved, allowed operations on resources, targeted platform deals, use cases, user interface mockups, design and development, architecture, chosen programming languages, data formats, external libraries, data storage. I'm about 1/10 through the list. Literally, if I had to design something to this level, I'd leave the company. I don't understand why manual isn't there 4 times. Getting started manual was actually not on the list as well, but I didn't put it on the slide. So I think there's a lot of different views about what document-driven development is. But if you're a big fan of Agile, you might want to look away now. And I don't want to bash Agile, but I did want to, I guess, seek some clarity in what I understand as document-driven development, what I think I would want to do. And I think with any Agile approach, and I'm just using Agile as an all-encompassing word, and I'm using Agile with the capital A, not agility with the lowercase a. There's lots of things right and wrong about it. There's a lot to be said about agility with the lowercase a rather than Agile frameworks necessarily. I think Agile frameworks are exactly that. They're a bunch of guidelines rather than rules, and the Agile Manifesto says that, so I'm happy with that. But if you compare it to, I think there's a lot of hype around Agile, which makes it cool to do Agile and not do waterfall. And I'm not advocating for waterfall, but what I am saying is there were lots of things that you got with that design ahead approach that you lose with Agile approaches, and I'll cover on a little bit more detail. I also feel like the Agile Manifesto is deliberately vague. When I say vague, it's not, it's quite specific, but it's open to interpretation. And it's also in direct conflict with all of the things I've just talked about with the old school design ahead approach. And that's probably intentional. For those of you who are familiar with the Agile Manifesto, these are, I guess, the core principles. So I think there's a few things in here that I buy into, and there's a few things in here that I might buy into. I haven't made my mind up yet. And actually, a lot of this talk is my ramblings. It's my thoughts on this. There's a few ideas at the end that I'll share with you, and it's things that I like to do, but it's up to you whether you do them. And I'm really happy. I kind of want this to be a bit of a discussion, to be fair. So I guess individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I kind of agree, but I don't agree with the over process. I think processes in a larger program of work. Working software over comprehensive documentation. Well, that is fundamentally against what I've just talked about with the old approach, right? Comprehensive documentation is a must when you're designing ahead and doing waterfall. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, bit of both. And then responding to change over following a plan. Well, I'll come to that one in a second. I do kind of like that one. Whether it works or not in the sorts of project I'm about to talk about, I'm not really sure. I guess the question when I was seeking this clarity was, has Agile ruined good design? That's probably me being a bit deliberately provocative, but Agile kind of advocates for designing for now. So you have a bunch of requirements. You do, it's the whole skateboard, was it? I can't remember what it is now. It's skateboard, bike, bus, whatever analogy you want to use. I'm just checking. I am actually sharing the right screen here, aren't I?
Seeing your slides.
Oh, that's all right. That's great. Cool. Fantastic. Thank you. For some reason, Zoom's telling me that I'm actually sharing my email currently. I don't know why that is. Cool. So yeah, has Agile ruined some good design? We're not designing too far ahead. We want to be reactive to feedback, and we want to be reactive to change. And that works unless you're doing something really, really big. There's a picture of a bridge on here, and actually using the bridge analogy, if you build for right now and you start with a small bridge, but later on you have to be a big bridge, then the bridge supports you've put in probably aren't going to satisfy the original requirement, and you're going to have to do work again, or you're going to have something that doesn't quite satisfy the future need. And that's probably fine if you're a small agile product company building a small product. Again, this is just me thinking out loud, right? So incremental stories, build what you need right now. The design right now might not be right for future requirements. And once you've built on top and on top and on top of that, your foundations might not be strong enough to support the thing that you need further down the line. I also feel a little bit like you lose a bit of the joined up thinking when you have bigger pieces of work. There needs to be a big plan somewhere. So should you design for what you need right now? I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. What I do know is, and I think it's important to have some context here. A lot of the clients that we work with, that I work with, they're large organizations. I mean, they've got employee counts in the thousands, tens of thousands. The IT department pretty much is bigger than most companies in a lot of these organizations. And they're running systems which are more than 30-year-old, just because they're risk averse, they work. Why would they change it? The process that they have quite dated. The business doesn't see IT, not like in a product company where I guess IT, software development, makes money. In these sorts of businesses, IT is a cost center, right? They don't make any money for the business; they spend money. And you generally in these organizations can't just build what you want using any tech you want. You have to build within some limits. And someone somewhere always wants to know when it's going to be done and how much it's going to cost. And that's probably the same for smaller companies. Probably a bit fair to say that just for the larger companies. I guess for the larger companies, they normally talk about larger amounts of money with way more governance around them. And then generally, you're not really dealing with one project. It's very few times I've actually been into an organization like this where basically you've been working on one small siloed project. It's generally been part of a bigger program of work, or part of some large organizational change or business transformation or something like that. And these programs, the project might be quite small, but the program of work is normally quite long running. It's over a period of years. And actually over that period of years, you have a lot of changing staff. People will start on a project, they'll kick it off, and then they'll get pulled off to something else, and then pulled on to something else. And actually, the staff turnover within projects within these sorts of organizations is quite high. So I guess there's a few things you need to be able to do. You need to make sure that everyone has access to, I guess, the latest patterns and practices. You don't want everybody to be doing different things. Certain things like there's just basic design principles, coding standards. It's against all service-oriented architecture thinking, and actually, let's face it, most of these businesses are talking about building service-oriented architectures. That the whole point of that is that you have a data contract that's strong, and then the tech doesn't matter, and you should be able to build a thing in Java, .NET, JavaScript, put it in the cloud, put it on-prem, wherever you want. The idea is that. The reality is not that. The reality is these organizations tend to have a pool of developers with a specific skill set. Normally .NET or Java, to be fair, in back-end investment banking systems. And at an organizational level, or at least departmental or divisional level, they want some consistency with the way the code's implemented, with branching strategies and all of the things that you would normally talk about as a team that in a true, I'm going to say microservices. I hate the term microservices. Services or an architectural environment. The services themselves, you wouldn't care. You don't care what's in the box, right? You just care about the entry points. So those patterns and practices have to be documented somewhere. Everybody's publishing their data contracts, unless you've got an off-the-shelf sort of, let's talk about RESTful APIs as an example, an API library where someone is looking after that. You're going to end up with a bit of a Wild West free-for-all where everybody's just building an API that's them, and you kind of want that a little bit, but what you really want is you want some joined-up thinking again in terms of, does this API already exist? Could we extend this API to do what this other team needs? Excuse me. You need to make sure everyone's versioning correctly. I've not worked in one of these organizations yet where some upstream team hasn't broke some endpoint that we were connecting to by not doing correct API versioning. It's just a given. So you kind of want that stuff in place. And then you also want knowledge to be shared. So not everybody's solving the same problems. it's very, very hard, right? You got a team of 20 people on the other side of the world building something, a team of 20 people on the other side of the world building something. Unless you've got that sort of that joined up approach, I'm going to keep saying joined up approach because I think it's important, then the chances are they could be building the same things. They could be building things that should possibly be shared libraries. They could be building things that might be worth inner sourcing within the organization so both teams can modify the same project or whatever. But the whole point is, how do you know? How do you know what this team you're based in London, how do you know what the team in Singapore is building, what the team in New York's building? You know, you need it more. You know, everybody's not trying to solve the same problems. And then I guess the other thing that's really important with these is you need to be able to report progress to the business. At some point in all of these organizations, you're going to have some really strong business delivery who doesn't really care about the IT. They just care that they're going to have their business value delivered at some point. You tell them it's going to be delivered. So reporting's important. I'm kind of digressing a little bit. I'm talking, but I think it's important that you understand the sort of these larger institutions with very, very disjointed teams and processes. So from a documentation point of view, trying to bring it back on track, I guess in my view, there's some critical jigsaw pieces. You need planning, and I'm not going to talk about planning because I kind of started to stray into planning just then, and I have no interest in talking about it on this talk or this evening. But I'm happy to talk about some other point if you want. I try to avoid it if I'm not a delivery manager. I'm fundamentally rooted in the tech, so consistency of approach, which I've talked about a little bit, and then for me, the biggest thing I normally ask for whenever going to an organization, where's your town plan? Can I see a town plan? And by town plan, I mean the very, very high level organizational diagram that says, right, these are all the systems we have. This is the dependency tree. These systems interact with these ones, and that's about the level I need. I don't need any more depth than that. I kind of dissed Agile a little bit before, specifically probably Scrum, to be fair, but I dissed Agile, and I'm not putting Agile down. I quite like Agile framework. I quite like working Agile. I think there's some things it misses. I'm not a delivery manager. I've said this a number of times. I'm going to say it again, but there is a thing called SAFE, which I'm sure other people on the call have read about, probably know way more about it than I do. Which is the Scaled Agile Framework. And it's designed, I guess, to allow teams to work Agile in a larger program of work. I've tried looking at this a few times. I keep coming across this diagram. I keep looking at it and thinking, hell no. It feels a lot like someone's just took all of the things and drawn them in a picture. And even when I started digging at the documentation, I thought, I literally needed, it felt like you need to go to university to study this as a subject. So that's great. I'll leave that to delivery managers. The reason I mention it here is I know fine well when I say I don't find Agile work so well in these large programs, that someone will say, what about SAFE? And I'm happy to be convinced, but right, I don't understand SAFE. So I'm going to come back to my critical jigsaw pieces. I mentioned consistency, but I don't want to talk about consistency now. I think I'll talk about that. I'm going to give you a little bit of, I'm going to move away from slides towards the end of this, show you some stuff. I think I'll come back to consistency then. I do want to talk about the town plan though. And I mentioned the town plan being this really, really high level thing. Anybody who's done enterprise architecture or done a larger solution or worked on a larger solution, the very first thing you want to know is you want to know the context, right? You want to know how everything hangs together, and you want that really high level view. So it's a map of how the system you're building fits into the organization. You want to know the integration points, you want to know the dependencies, but this document can get out of date very quickly because it spans the whole organization, and it has to be owned and it has to be governed. So how do we do that? And actually, there's been a few proposals for this, and one I actually quite like. I'm not going to advocate it 100%, and I'll give you the caveats in a little bit. But most people on here on the call I've looked at, there's a few names I recognize, will have come across the C4 model before. If you haven't, go and have a look at it. It's worth looking at, c4model.com. And I guess this is a way for me of writing down what architects have done for a lot of years, but in a non-formal way. In that nearly all systems you build are fractal, so you'll find you'll have a layout of components, and then you'll pick a component, you'll zoom in, and they'll have a similar layout where you have like data components, logical components, I/O components, whether they're APIs or actual physical storage or whatever. And it's fractal. You can zoom in and in. C4 model identifies 4 levels of zooming: context, containers, components, and code. And I actually quite like this because it's just a way of describing that zooming. I'm going to get on to what I don't like about it now, in that it's quite prescriptive in what each level contains. And I think it has a number of omissions that should be included. I'm happy to talk about them later. I'm not going to derail the talk by talking about them now. Excuse me. One thing I do think is it pays a little bit of lip service to documentation. It feels a lot like you write some stuff in a box and then you move on. And as someone who's received a design to work on in this format, it doesn't give me enough. I had to go looking for the detail. So I think it's missing the detail. There's no concept in any of these diagrams, or there's no examples of at a component level, which is where you'd normally do this, of any documentation style that prescribes state transitions over time. They're all very flat, so there tend to be dependency trees, data flow diagrams, that sort of thing. There's no state. If you're doing streaming, there's no real guidance on what those diagrams should look like. So while I guess I agree with the levels of zooming, that's about as far as I go with the C model. I don't necessarily feel like at each level, the type of diagram that they prescribe fits every use case. I think it's a little restrictive. I like what they've done, but for me, selecting the right type of diagram at each level is key. So we've got that. We've talked about what we want. We want a town plan. We want levels of depth. We want to be able to zoom in component from a documentation point of view, and we want to. I guess the other thing is we want to make sure we're using the right tools. There's a C4 modeling tool. Call me a cynic, but part of me thinks that the reason that they came up with the C4 model was to sell the tooling. It's not a very good tool in my view. However, it is supported in a lot of the sort of the standard drawing tools, diagrams.net, which is now Draw.io, Structureize, there's a few others. We all know the Atlassian stack that we all use. I'd imagine people have documented in Confluence before. I have a personal feeling that Confluence is where documents go to die. Again, I'm happy to be corrected on that. Or happy to have that discussion at least. There's lots of crossover between these different documents, but in most cases, if you ask a BE in one of these larger organizations to come up with a bunch of requirements document, it'll be Word or Excel, pretty much. We're never going to get rid of Excel from this world. Excel is here to stay, and Word as well. And Word, it's in the title. You're going to get a Wordy doc. It's not what I want as a developer. There's other enterprise tools for gathering requirements and stuff like Helix and a few other things. I'm sure there's others that you've used or had used and been past you in the past. And then I guess so there's a bunch of tools, lots of different disparate tools. Some of them you're locked into the vendor. I don't know if anybody's ever tried exporting the whole of a Confluence tree out and using it somewhere else. I found it impossible. If anybody knows how to do that, please let me know how. I'd love to know. So you're kind of locked into a vendor. You want to move to something else later, you're a bit knackered. And then I guess maintenance. I don't know how many developers are on the call, how many BAs, how many skill sets are on the call, but developers hate writing documentation. I'm a developer, I'm happy to say that. I don't think I've met a developer who does, especially when it's using a WYSIWYG editor in some other thing that's not your ID. So documentation, it's always an afterthought, it's always a chore. Our documentation tends to get out of sync with the development. So someone will propose a change, probably a change in requirements, so you'll get a document from the BAs. The developer generally will make the change in code, in my experience, will make the change in code before they document the change in the technical documents. Wrong way around, in my view, but let me talk about that in a little bit. So it quickly gets out of sync because it never gets done. When you're under the cosh to get some stuff over the line, what's going to suffer? Well, unit tests, testing, and documentation. We all know that. It's wrong. Shouldn't happen, but it does. It's the reality. So in a lot of cases, we can guarantee code quality. I've just mentioned unit tests and testing kind of get pushed over the line, but actually we can guarantee code quality by doing strong testing. So why not quality of documentation? Why can't the documents always be up to date? And let's talk about that a little bit. So why not make documentation part of the development process? And I guess this brings us back to the title of the talk, document-driven development. In order to do that, documentation has to be written in a language that maintainers understand, normally English or whatever the language of the organization. So you have to have something that's as close to writing a Word doc for a BA as possible. If you ask a BA, and actually some really good, a lot of BAs will be able to write JSON and SQL and stuff like that. But generally, when they're writing down requirements, they want to write it in English in a WYSIWYG editor. So it has to be in a language that maintainers understand, right? It has to be easy to maintain, has to be easy to share and find, and it has to be a process that where you can govern change. Just has version control. If you don't have version control on these things, then you end up with lots of disparate documents. So I guess what I'd like to do now is that there's things we like, right? So I'd like to go back over a lot of the things and pick the things from all the things I've talked about that I like. And this is a personal preference. So I like a consistent approach. I like the idea of a town plan proposed by context level of the C4 model. I like the zooming into detail. That's something we've always done before C4 existed, but actually the C4 model talks about that. Like flexible tooling. A lot of the new IDEs of VS Code specifically have very, very flexible tool sets now. That's going to be, I guess, the substance of the demo I'll do in a little bit. Workshopping. So old school workshopping up front. I quite like workshopping for change, face-to-face interactions. I think over the last 18 months, it's highlighted how important face-to-face interactions are. Just started getting back into the offices now and speaking directly with the teams and sticking posters on the wall and drawing things on whiteboards. And you get way more done in a few hours doing that than you do in a week of Teams calls or Zoom calls. So workshopping's great. A drawing or a picture says 1,000 words. So drawing's brilliant. Like, and to the point documents, I don't care whether the grammar's good. I mean, it should be, but I don't care whether the grammar's good. I don't care whether basically a paragraph's one sentence. As long as that sentence is succinct and tells me what the requirement is or what the expectation is, then that's what I like. I don't want to read for reading's sake. I don't want to have to read a 4-page document just to find out about one small change that's been asked for. I want that to be succinct. I guess on the flip side, things we don't like. It's really good that it's Halloween because got to find some really cool pictures. My boys didn't like this one. But I don't like wordy documentation. I don't like disparate sources where basically things are being maintained all over the shop. I don't like multiple tools. Oh, by the way, this document's in Word, or there's this thing in Excel, or there's this thing in Confluence, or there's this thing in source control. I don't like that. Actually, I didn't really talk about lost decision history. This happens sometimes, so it depends on how disciplined the team is. But I find a lot of the time with Scrum specifically, you'll do something in sprint 1, say. Sprint 2, you'll make a change because of something really important. Sprint 3, you'll do something else. Sprint 4, you'll change back the thing that you changed in sprint 2 because it seemed like the right thing to do to deliver something in sprint 4. But the reason why you made the change in sprint 2 isn't well documented. And even if it was, doesn't come up, isn't well linked for the story ahead. Whereas I think having a strong decision log is really important. And that's something that some teams do well, some teams don't. Not necessarily an agile thing. It's probably a bit unfair to pin that on agile, or on Scrum at least. But it's something that's been missing a lot of the time. And then lost changes is very, very similar. So someone will change a document somewhere, but they won't link it to the story in Jira or whatever you're using. And therefore, you go and implement something and then someone goes, well, that's not the latest version of the document. So those are the things I don't like. So I've rambled for a long time now about stuff. I'd like to share something now. So I think the first question I want to ask is, how do we say what's document or not? Whenever we talk about document, they think Word doc, they think lots of words and pictures, they think book. I'd argue that a document is any file that documents something. So are code files documents? In some senses, yes. If they're well commented or well written, they are. I think I'd draw the line before code. But I would say things like JSON documents, or YAML documents, which form an open API spec, for example, that's a document specification. That's a valid document. I think you can generate those in a way. There's so many pointy clicky tools now where a BA doesn't necessarily have to write YAML, or a systems designer or solutions owner or a product owner or someone who's defining an API doesn't have to write YAML or JSON. It'd be great if they could. The open API spec is quite a solid one. I quite like it, if I'm honest. But there's lots of pointy clicky tools now where you can do that. You can do it. Postman, probably one of the most common ones, where you can set up your APIs and then export it as open API, or you can build it. I think at this point, I want to flick across to VS Code, which is my IDE of choice. Other IDEs are available. There's no slur here on any JetBrains product or anything like that, or WebStorm or any of the others. So what I've done here is I quite like to keep my documentation really close to the code. And actually, in the real world, we probably wouldn't have. By the way, can everybody see VS Code? I haven't shared the window, have I?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. Great. So tend to work. In VS Code. I tend to use Git as our version control system. I tend to use or try and bring documents as close as I possibly can to the code. But the thing is, with document-driven design, you want to do the documents first, right? So let's start with a README. And actually, this README is Markdown. So I talked before about we want a language that everybody can understand. I think Markdown is the closest language that I've found that is almost like just writing a document. It's simple to learn and understand. There's some more complex versions of Markdown, but in its basic sense, you can do titles, subheadings, border boundaries, links, the things that you actually need to get started. The great thing about most IDEs these days is the second that you actually start using it, you can get previews. So as a developer, great, I can sit here and I can work on my Markdown and I can see my text. The other thing I can do is obviously I can link relative links. So this is just a readme.md file. As everybody knows, when you publish something to your Git repository, generally if it's Bitbucket or GitHub or one of the common ones, it'll just show this. So this is a good starting page. I can follow a link here, and this is all linked. So if I go into my overview, we're starting essentially with the C4 model. We talked about zooming. So in the C4 model, this is your context layer. So I've created Acme Trading Company. And I guess I talked before about consistency. This is where you would link to your design principles, your coding standards, and your top level documents. You could link from here. And again, these live in your docs folder. So you've got your coding standards, principles. Keep them very, very close. There's drawings you want to include in this, right? So basically this drawing here, well, what we want is we want a drawing tool that's that basically is not vendor locked in. There's a few knocking about. My go-to is Draw.io, what used to be diagrams.net, and it's been called lots of other things as well. In fact, I don't think it can actually make its mind up what it's called, because when you started, I think you get 3 different names on the splash screens. But it's now closely linked to Google Drive. And I don't know if anybody knows, but recently there's now an offline version of Draw.io, so I can now pull in drawings into VS Code with the plugin, and I can modify my drawings in the same environment. The good thing about this is the drawings are saved as JSON files. So you can store them as part of your source control, and then you can track changes. You can even review them as part of your PRs. What I tend to do to include them in documents, because the thing they're missing right now is these are stored as SVGs pretty much, with a bit of wrapping around the outside. But the thing they're missing right now in Markdown is the Markdown renderers don't support necessarily SVG images. So all I do is I just normally export it as a PNG, which is create into a PNGs folder, and then I'll go back to my overview here. I can preview, and you get all the little buttons at the top here, so I can click preview. So this is my diagram. And then I guess in the C4 model organization, I've got a bunch of systems here, system 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to focus on system 1 because I didn't want to build the whole thing just for this talk. So I've built system 1. So I can say, oh, I'm interested in system 1, and this is my zooming, I guess. So this is the one where it breaks probably. But that's how we go. Let's follow this link. Cool. So I can do that. Which one's that? It's preview. So I can preview this. So I'm now in system 1, and we can see that system 1 has a dependency on system 2 and 3. It has a so this is my containers level. So I have a trading API, a price streaming API, and a trading UI. And likewise, I can keep linking down to the depths. So I can do where are we? Let's go to trading API. Let's do API, for example. So I can do this one. So into this overview. So now I'm at my component level. So I've got a component diagram and a couple of databases and some repositories and a trading service and stuff. And I can start to define my API, but at this point, I'm like, well, hang on a minute, my API, this doesn't really tell me much. It's great to show in a diagram. Well, actually, what about the data contract? So what about, oh, it keeps opening this in the wrong window, bear with me. I'm going to just do that one instead. So that's great. Oh, so this is a YAML file. So this is an open API spec for that trade API. Well, that's great, but at this point, I can say, well, what can Visual Studio do for me now? Open that with Redoc. So now I can actually see this API. I can even open it from here with Swagger. So do this sort of thing. Default window, I think, is Swagger. So Swagger UI, and I can go through this stuff. And then I guess the other thing is there's loads of other extensions that Visual Studio, and this isn't a plug for VS Code, to be fair. Other IDEs do this. The point is we're using like off-the-shelf standardized tools where I don't have to care what the tool is. I can jump into the API here and say, right, I'm viewing this API, and it can give me different levels. Say this was a massive long document, there's like an API Explorer that it's pulled in. I can load Thunder Client here, which is basically an embedded version of the, it's a RESTful client, same as Postman. I can do everything from in my IDE. And then CI changes, so quantity is not an integer anymore. Say it's just a number. That's great. Well, you know, the thing is, because this is close to my code base, I can do git status. Well, that's changed, great. In my Git window, I can see the changes. And I can put this up for PR. So it can be validated before it's merged. And then I guess the other thing you can do, this is the document bit. This feeds directly into test-driven development. So going back that workflow I talked about right at the very start, you update your document or you write your document. Well, that's what we've just been doing. You create a failing test. This is an API example. We can do other examples, but for this, I can literally take this into Postman, and Postman will run it against the service that's running, which is my source. I think I've got some source here, so I can spin this up. At each level, I've got my documentation level here as well. So actually, if I want an overview of the trading API, which is where I was, I can say, oh, I want to know a bit about the data model. So I can jump to the data model. And this tells me a little bit of the data model. If I want to see it nice, shiny review like that, and then I can say, all right, I want to look at the portfolios. I can link straight to my code. That's level 4 of your C4 model, right? You can link straight to your code. There's nothing in there at the moment because, like I said, this was a boilerplate thing I set up to demonstrate it. And I can run my tests from that. So my documentation is driving the setup of my tests, and then from there you're into, I guess, a TDD, right? A failing test, make your code pass. That's where I'm at. That's my view of how I'd like to do things. I don't know how long that was, but I think at this point, I think that's me.
Cool. Thanks very much, Mark. I suppose any questions, really?
Anybody got any? There's quite a few things I said throughout there where I was expecting people to go, no, you're wrong. So is there anybody disagrees with anything I've said and wants to discuss it? Like I'm quite keen on this like interactive type sessions rather than
I think it's always a very interesting discussion about agile, and agile as projects get bigger and teams get bigger.
Agreed.
I think
Agreed.
there are, I would probably be as bold as to say 80% of the people in teams who claim they work in an agile way don't.
Oh no, I'd agree with
And
that. I don't think I've come across any, to be fair. I think 80% is actually quite fair.
and I think it's an interesting approach to take the documents and to put them in the hands of the devs and the testers and say, you haven't got to learn new tools, you haven't got to learn new ways of working, and it's embedded in what you do every day.
I mean, I'd actively encourage not just devs and test engineers, but I'd actively encourage the uptake of Markdown, at least by BAs as well, to be fair. It depends. I've worked on some projects where BAs are very non-technical, they're very business focused. But actually a lot of the BAs that you find in these organizations are close to the data model, for example. So they might know some simple SQL, they might know some simple JSON, and actually it's a very, very small step for them then to write Markdown. So I'd try and actively encourage that if I could in most organizations, because I think
interesting option.
I'd certainly second that. I tend to write everything that I do that I need for myself or for the team in Markdown. And then if I need to convert it to something else, you know, tools like Pandoc, if you're on Mac or Linux, can turn it into anything you like.
Yeah, so you've got Redoc, I think, is one that's talking about. You've got obviously Swagger, which is the most common, I guess, for open API and stuff. Markdown, actually, I didn't show you this, but actually there's a PDF exporter as well. So we've got one BA on the existing project that we're on.
Don't wash your mouth out.
Well, she doesn't want to use it, but yeah, you can just right click and export the PDF. And
PDF.
There's someone's hand up there, so yeah.
Hey, hello. I have a question. So with all of this document, how do we correlate them to the user story? And how do we communicate, how do we explain this to a business person if we have to explain something for non-technical people?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. So there's a few things here, I guess. In my view, depending on the BAs you're working with, and the product you're working on, whether it's a UI thing or an API thing, I think the back end thing or a front end thing, I think they're a bit different. This is going to end up in some source control. I don't know what everybody else's experience is, but most of the large enterprises tend to work with the Atlassian stack or Azure DevOps. So therefore your tickets, well, your code's going to end up in, let's take Atlassian, your code's going to end up in Bitbucket, which is Git based, and your tickets are going to be in Jira more generally. So I don't think you change your stories, right? Jira ticket is the right place to put a story, which is a functional requirement. You don't change that. I think this tends to be the missing piece, the thing that doesn't normally get done. So the user story is the sim. The user story goes through some review by the team, and then the team produce this middle piece, which is, this is how we're going to build this thing. So the user story is the functional requirement that can live in Jira, as far as I'm concerned. I'm quite happy for that to happen. I don't really want it to live in Confluence, if I'm honest. Like, everything that you're going to build in the story should be in the story. And then, of course, if this is in Bitbucket, I'm taking the Atlassian stack as an example, then obviously Bitbucket is linkable. So what I would tend to do then is you document in the folder you're going to implement in Bitbucket. It goes through PR, it goes through review, it's on a branch, and that branch is literally linked to the Jira ticket as much as if you were putting in a pull request for code, right? If you're going to build a story and just write code, you'd create a branch off the ticket and you'd write the code, it would go through review and it would be merged. I think you do exactly the same for the documentation. So you branch off the story, you go through design review and you merge. And that's the first commit, and then following commits are the implementation. That's how I would go about it. I don't know if that answers your question, in terms of them seeing the documents, or the BAs coming back and looking at the documents when they're not for you, then again, you can, developers can export the PDF. But actually, if you click on the link in Jira specifically and it takes you to Bitbucket, then Bitbucket renders Markdown files anyway for you.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess there will be a way for a business user to change the documents, for example, on Confluence, and then it's gonna like, there's a webhook or something that's gonna sync back to our repository, I guess, maybe.
I would try not to use Confluence in this flow. I think if it's a business requirement, it should be in a story. And if it needs supporting documentation, it should be in a repository, which is the same repository using for your documentation. In terms of if a BA needs to change one of the design documents, say, for example, let's do with a data model or something like that, then they could do it in Notepad. That's the beauty of Markdown. It can be edited in any editor. You don't need. One of the biggest things I had this last week, in that one of the BAs had done a lovely drawing. It was a PDF. They'd attached it to a story in Jira. I went and looked at the PDF and said, "Oh, that's needs some changes." And she went, "All right, I'll change it." And she changed it, and then she attached a Visio file. Now, within that organization, I don't have a Visio license. So then I had to go back to her and say, "Actually, can you just render that as another PDF and update it?" And I think that's the problem with these vendor tools. And I'm not putting down any vendor tools. I think Visio is a great tool, by the way. But unless everybody in the organization who's using it has a license for it, then you have a problem. Whereas the thing is here, we're making text files, and they're being rendered by whichever tool you want to use to render them. And I think that's important. So if the BA want to make the change, they could make that change in Git. Actually, with Markdown files, you can actually edit the file in Git in most Git implementations, like there and then, and produce a commit on the fly in a nice pointy clicky way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm thinking that if we somehow can have combination with between this and the tools like Notion or Web, then it's going to be perfect, because from Notion and Web you can export to Markdown files, and then I guess the collaboration is going to be much easier between the departments.
I mean, I mentioned at the start, actually, you've mentioned a few other tools there. I mentioned at the start that the whole inspiration for this talk was after a conversation I had with an ex-colleague who worked for a client that I used to work with about 4 or 5 years ago. And he's actually working for a company now that are developing a product which is specifically for this zooming, like good software documentation. So I'm going to give a shameless plug, dependec.com. Keep your eyes on it. I don't think there's anything available right now, but I've got some early sight of the product they're building, and it's really quite nice. But it integrates with all of the stuff we've talked about. It generates JSON files, so you can put them in Git. But the tool itself is there. It's quite nice too. So it's probably worth keeping your eyes out for that one as well.
That's cool. Thank you.
I think there's a question in the chat, Mark.
Oh, sorry, I'm not following the chat. Sorry.
No worries. I'll. I don't know. Can you see that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Thanks for listening.
Ciao.
So specification from other teams. So I guess is this to do with data contracts? So how teams communicate, how different projects communicate, and getting some clarity on that. It's quite a broad question. Yes, cool. Yeah, I guess so. I'm going to cover the API example, RESTful APIs specifically, or APIs over HTTP. Because actually I think API is a massive term. It covers all sorts of APIs, and it totally depends on the API you're building, whether it's a streaming API or whether it's actually could be like a software API as well, into some DLL or something like that. But I'm going to talk about the RESTful one. I think this is pretty standard across the industry, that you have to have you have to have rigorous versioning practice, and also you have to in a large organization you have to have a curated API library. There's a lot of large enterprise products out there like IBM Connect, and some obviously cloud-based versions of them as APIM in Azure, and what's the API Gateway, I think it is, or there's Apigee in Google. You have to govern the process of who builds APIs and when they're allowed to change them and who changes them. And actually, generally what you tend to find is in the larger organizations, you'll have a design authority or a technical board, where if you want to build an API for your project, you submit your API spec, and that open API is a great standard for that. and the board will then take and say, wait, do we have an API that's like this somewhere else in the business? If not, yeah, great, build it, but actually maybe change these few things because they're not aligned with our data dictionary or something like that. Or they might say, actually, we've already got an API that's similar. You should speak to this team about adding to it. And actually, I say when you say speak to this team, in large organizations, sometimes you have these bottlenecks, but one thing that found is becoming more and more common now is inner sourcing. That's a whole other subject. So for anybody who's built an open source project before, I guess inner source is kind of open source, but within your organization, where a project is essentially owned by a team, but you can submit PRs. And so what they might do is they might say, oh, actually, this other team has an API that's very similar to the one you want, which provides very similar data. Submit a PR to add the extra features to that, and they'll make that change. That's the only thing you can do. It has to be centralized. It's very, very hard to have decentralized data contract management within a large organization. It has to have some either centralized tool or centralized group of people governing that. And in terms of a clear spec, sorry, I guess your question specifically said clear idea specification. Pick a standard. The Open API spec is pretty clear. It has a bunch of required things. You have to say that you have to specify types. You have to specify the methods. You have to specify, and obviously that's for RESTful. There's other specs are available. There's a streaming spec now actually, which is quite nice. Which is a spin-off of the Open API spec for streaming interfaces through WebSockets and other sort of streaming technologies. I hope that answers your question.
So I think there's some like super ideas in the presentation about kind of how documentation can help you with design, help you with your process and all that stuff. But the thing that comes to mind, maybe you alluded to this a bit, is to what extent do you think like the tools we use as part of our process kind of drive your thinking on this? And, you know, on that note, do you think there's some tools that we need to get out of and just do in a different way in order to be able to do like a more document driven approach? I
think, yeah, I mean, that's a really personal opinion question, Chris. Thanks for that. I'll answer it, but this is my personal opinion. I think the less you use a vendor specific file format for the files you save, the better situation you're in. Because the second you start using the file format to save your files in, that's a specific file format, then you're kind of tied into that product. And what you really want is you want everybody on the team to just pick whichever tool they like for handling a standardized file format. So JSON where you can, YAML where you can, Open API spec for RESTful stuff. That's worldwide adopted now. It's pretty standard to go to Open API or Swag, what used to be Swagger. So use standards. There's international standards body for all these files. Use standard file types, and then most tools will support them. And then you don't really care which tool you use one that suits you. That would be my view on it. I can see you nodding. I hope you agree.
guess I was thinking a little bit about the process side of things as well. So like
process.
If you sort of look at it from an agile point of view, we almost everybody, and you said it yourself before as well, like sometimes in large organizations in particular, you're constrained by the tool set that you can use because that's just what they've got, right? But but I do think, I do wonder if the fact that everybody uses Jira kind of drives this problem that you described of, you have your user story in Jira, and actually what you really want is you want your user story alongside some of the other useful documentation that applies to developers and business folks alike, but in the same place. But Jira doesn't always do that particularly well, and even if you try and link it up with Confluence, it doesn't always work that well.
Jira, in my view, has a million fields, and I get fed up with clicking on buttons. And I don't like Jira. Again, this is not a slag off the Atlassian stack. I know I've said I don't like Confluence, I don't like Jira. I think I just don't like them because I'm forced to use them. If I'd picked them, I probably would like them. You know me, Chris, right? But I think in a software design world, everybody has some source repository technology, or like Git, regardless of whether it's Bitbucket, GitHub, whatever. Git or SVN even, to be fair, if you really have to SVN. But Git is literally a version control system that handles text files very, very well. And if you can build your process around that, then you're going to be in a better place. One thing we do on the current project, I can't say too much about the actual project itself, but when we groom stories, when we go through the stories, we make all of our notes and all of our questions are in a markdown file. And those markdown files are actually put on the branch that we're about to develop on. And then they're linked from the Jira ticket. So we use the comments, but the commenters tend to just be, had a review session on this date, here's the markdown file. Just the teams just like working in their IDE. They don't like coming out to go to a browser. Most of our teams don't even like using the mouse, to be fair. They do everything from the command line. So a question at one point you spoke about Agile and Waterfall. Don't know if I've missed documentation created in Agile or a Waterfall way. That's a good question. I would say both. So I guess when I was talking about Agile, I think you lose some things with Agile. You lose that upfront sort of aligned thinking across multiple projects when you're looking at a larger program that contains multiple projects. So I think the waterfall way is to design things up front. And I think in terms of some of the key architectural decisions around the project, you should definitely do in a waterfall way. There should be a few weeks at the start of any large program of work where you write down, right, for our service architecture, every service is going to need access to some messaging technology. Therefore, how do we go about that? What's our design principles around how we name topics and queues in that messaging system? Are we going to use REST? Are we going to use WebSocket? What if we have RPC style requests? Are they messaging? Are they RESTful? All of these large architectural decisions. In order to do that thinking, you have to know at least what your big components are. You have to know what your interactions are. You need to know what your data interactions are and the types of data you're doing. Is that data like event-based data, or is it like CRUD type data? So I think you have to do all of the waterfall stuff up front from a 30,000 foot view of your town plan. I think once you've done that, you can then work in an agile way within the individual projects. Depending on what you're doing, I tend to like to pick Scrum for new projects or greenfield projects. I tend to like to pick Kanban if it's something a bit more reactive. And then actually, there's no reason why you can't document stories while you're grooming them when you're working agile within the individual project. But I think at a program level, you should be doing a bit of waterfall. Make sure that the teams don't have to worry about the large concerns, because actually they're going to be enterprise concerns anyway. You're going to have to let them live within the enterprise architecture and the infrastructure that's there. Hope that answers your question. Cool. Anything else, anyone else? I think that's us, Martin, isn't it?
Cool. Yeah, I think it is. So I'll just wrap up very, very quickly. Obviously, thanks so much for that, Mark. Really, really interesting, and yeah, good bit of discussion at the end there. A couple of future events coming up for us. Wednesday, 3rd of November, as per the slide there. Overview of domain-driven design, which kind of, as far as my limited technical knowledge tells me, fits in potentially with.
I'm not sure you're sharing one.
Oh no, I'm not. No.
I did one. I was like, "Where's the slide?" I thought I'd done something.
I was going to say, where is the slide? Share screen. There we go. There we go. Can we see that? Apologies. Yeah. So yeah, Wednesday, 3rd November. An overview of domain-driven design. So I'm going to presume, Mark, there'll be a little bit crossover with some of the things you've potentially touched on there, or am I totally off the mark?
No, it's absolutely fine. That's a really good talk. Actually, I've seen Phil give that talk before.
How are you? Good,
yeah.
Perfect. So that's a good recommendation there. And we've got Dan Pudwell.
And Dan as well. Whatever Dan talks about will be good.
Well, this is it. Dan's keeping a bit of a secret. So if there's a reason to jump on the meetup page and have a look there, that could also be it. As I said, if anyone's got any topics or anything they'd like to speak about, do get in touch with myself. Mark, you mentioned any tech. We've got a meet up next week as well. that could be of
Next
interest.
Thursday, yeah. Next Thursday. I can't
Yep.
remember what the title of that one is, but next
Next
Thursday
Thursday.
is quite interesting.
yeah.
talk on.
Yeah, do check out the meetup page as well, for any tech. And yeah, obviously this will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow at some point. So if you want to join that, all our previous talks are on there as well. So yeah, I think that kind of wraps things up for this evening. But thanks very much for joining us. Thanks again, Mark. Really enjoyed that, and we appreciate your support.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Cheers,
guys.
Mark.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.